the wedge is let's start with dating, and then let's graduate you on to what we consider as like your romantic home base.
Dating with maps is interesting. Is it investable?
Hold on, let me take a step back.
Our platform is a technology that makes that iteration faster, much faster, 100x faster.
You're kind of like exposing yourself to like, what are the connections that they're making, and how do I kind of combine all those connections?
So every week I get to welcome a professional check writer because I do it as an angel investor and as a founder in the space. Let you introduce yourself because you do it better than me. Who are you?
On my end, my name is Leeor Mushin. I started Formation, a founder of GP. I guess originally I was an operator in the kind of energy space randomly, and then when I started a company 10 years ago, my co-founder still runs a talent marketplace. Went to business school for a bit, started a micro fund, kind of first of its kind, allowing unaccredited investors to be able to invest into private assets. I was at Floodgate for a while, joined the partnership, and about a year and a half ago decided to spin out and start my own fund. Formation is a pre-seed and seed fund. More specifically, we invest at the formation stage. We partner with founders who are, thinking through, starting their startup. Some of our early investments in this fund were founders who, it was 11 months before they raised capital. They had a half-page Google Doc on what they were potentially considering pursuing. So we like to partner with founders. If anything, we actually look more like, I think, like free agency than maybe a traditional venture firm, in the sense that rather than try to grow AUM and have misaligned incentives with founders, we actually really try to partner with people, be more valuable to folks during that formation stage process than all other investors combined. And I like to think that our founders would say that as well.
I'm super excited. Leeor, are you ready?
I'm so ready.
Crowd, you ready? Let's welcome founder number one to the stage. What's your name?
Hey everybody, Jared.
Jared, are you ready to give your pitch and then get some feedback?
I'm pumped.
Jared, what are you building?
Yep, so I'm Jared, co-founder and CEO of Grid. I like to say that our product sits at the intersection of Yelp and Hinge. So our users, we match them based on the places they like to go and the things that they like to do. Sort of how we came up with this idea started with two problems. On the consumer side, my co-founder and I had been dating app users and felt the fatigue that everyone else feels today. On the B2B side, I'm personally a hospitality investor here in New York City. It's kind of no question, we always need tools to market to more patrons. And coming from, I had scaled a couple of startups and worked in venture capital, I knew there had to be a way to bridge the market through technology, right? And so far, in the last 6 months since launch, we've gone from 400 users to 8,000. Been featured in Us Weekly, received investment from one of the founders of Tinder, and our social media alone has reached almost 1 million people in the last 6 months. Yeah, that's about it. And thank you guys for listening. Excited to get feedback.
Just under a minute. Good job.
Yeah, good job.
Super interesting. I have a lot of different thoughts, but Leeor, I'm going to go to you first with a question, actually. When you hear Yelp and Tinder as the combo, that was like the immediate first thing that was like,
Yelp
okay,
and
that
Hinge,
combo, it's like, what'd you say?
Yelp and Hinge.
And Hinge, sorry, yeah. It's super interesting. Ooh, it's interesting that you like want that specific analogy. I'll ask you about that later.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense. That to me was a combo I don't think I've heard specifically before. I've heard some of the like match you based on location or like an interest sort of, or forcing the first date type of apps. But what did you think about that analogy?
Yeah, I mean, without understanding the product a little bit more, my initial intuition is always with any type of like dating app or trying to meet people out in the world is, what's the specific kind of unique insight, and then additionally, like what is the glimmer in the user's eyes that got them to download and then continue to use the app to begin with. And so that was kind of my first kind of question here. I think specifically with like the Yelp piece, like I also wonder what that looks like in like a world of AI as well. I won't say AI too much, given my VC-dom and whatnot, but I do I wonder what that looks like. What does discovery look like? What does, understanding someone's preferences look like? So those were some of the questions that initially came up.
Yelp to me is a company that has turned into a data company from, kind of what I understand, and that in Foursquare. So it hasn't achieved as much as it wanted in the physical world. And then Hinge and the cohort of dating app companies all get swallowed by IAC. Right. It's two very useful companies as analogies for you, but they also, to me, as someone who's been in tech for a long time, and it sounds like you've been in venture in tech for a long time too, when you combine them, I was like, those are two stressful companies. And they make sense. They made me think about user experience very quickly, but they also made me think, those are hard companies. The market is hard, the competition's rough, and which is also true of your app. I just wonder if you're front-loading stress by going for analogies of like, again, Hinge might not be as much in this category. I think it is. But
I think it kind of is, yeah.
Yeah, with the venture outcome and the startup outcome isn't amazing. The brand outcome is fantastic for both of those companies. But again, both of those founding teams and those early stage teams had to put in so much muscle. So that's my first bit of feedback is think about whether that is doing as much as you need it to do, because your concept, I think, can be explained. You're a good communicator. I think your pitch, by the way, was well structured. So you could probably explain it without the analogy and therefore not put those two companies in my head right away, whether in the context of this or a longer meeting.
Yeah, I think one just quick note on that is that one of the biggest mistakes I see founders make that is just like an unnecessary error in ways is because if understanding the VC's incentives, like a lot of people will, when I look at a pitch deck, will reference a company that exited for $100 million. And luckily with a slightly smaller fund, that actually is a decent outcome. But at the same time, that's not like what I'm underwriting to. And so when you reference companies, like especially on the Hinge front, that have had like an okay, not great outcome, it does make me, to your point, think like, is that what might happen here? Does the founder understand my incentives? And so that's like a key question that comes up.
Yeah, because it's almost like, in an ideal world, what you're trying to do is saying, I'm combining these concepts to describe to you user experience, but over a long enough time horizon, I'll do better than both of them. Right. But again, because of just the nature of you hear those brands and your brain goes, not great as, again, effort times ROI. But why don't you had some good questions there. I'm curious, I'll toss to you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, would love to understand a little bit more, like why does a user even want to download the app? What is the glimmer in the eye that you notice, especially as you went from 400 users to 8,000 users? Like what were those moments that you think are really are exemplified by the user experience with what you're building?
Yeah. Just to quickly touch on the first point, I think something I've been thinking about a lot is making sure, or trying to figure out a way to give a comparison stack for an investor versus a user. Like I think the comparison stack that I gave probably is like a good hook for a user, maybe not so much
that's a good
investor pitch.
Yeah.
So thank
Great
you.
Point, yeah.
I'll make sure to do that. What is a glimmer, you ask? Yeah, it's a good question. I think there are a lot of different reasons why people come and continue to come back to our app. We have a natural discovery sort of aspect to the product. And we see that as being like, you get a lot of people who just moved to New York City. We're only live in New York for context. Actually, for most of last year, only live in 2 neighborhoods, but we can get into that. And so there's the natural discovery, right? People move to a new city. That was something that my co-founder and I had felt when we had moved to San Francisco. Like, is there something where I could meet somebody at a place that maybe I want to check out, but have no one to go to? Then you have the other side of the spectrum, which I think are people who have their places. They have like their New York natives, or at least consider themselves so. And they suffer from their friends might be in relationships. They can't get together on a Wednesday or a Thursday and try all these amazing places. And with that user sort of, with that type of user, I guess you see intentionality in dating being like the key driver. And can expand more on like the user experience there, but I'll stop if that brings up any questions.
I think, by the way, the first user you described is so much more compelling than the second. I understand why, like a woman who has a favorite spot that she might use on this app as a sharing and then dating mechanism is useful and key. But the hook of like why someone might download when they moved is so much more compelling that almost anchor your story again in the context of investor conversations more on just that one of like when people are migrating, they want to find spots. And we start conversations around spots. And then a fun fact for later in the conversations, by the way, there are also people who love to share spots. But again, that's so much less compelling to spot on a relative basis. The question I have, this is kind of related to the Hinge and Yelp analogy of it all. I assume this is why you had 2 neighborhoods. You have to have density, right?
Yes, exactly. Right.
So
hyper-local launch.
Right. How much does this rely on people agreeing to shortcut to that first thing? Like maybe this gets into your user experience or maybe it gets into philosophy of behaviors you have to encourage. Do you force me to go, first of all, do I have to like say a spot before I get to be in the matching algorithm? Do you then force me to go on the date, or is there a chat experience where you still are leaving it to the users, but they have like a floating theory of a concept of a place they could go should they decide to? Are you more doing that, like a slight tweak, or is it I'm going to force this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess let me start with the user experience, and that might shed some light on the questions. So traditional dating app, let's use Hinge as the example, right? You download, you set up a profile. There are certain things that are required. Right away, once you finish that, you see profiles of people who you could potentially match with, right? That's the homepage, right? Is that swipe matching experience. With us, you can download, complete a profile, then you are prompted using a map or a list view, and you can obviously filter on neighborhoods, places to go, events, a bunch of different things. You need to first select those places. And then that's sort of where the intentionality comes in. And also, to your point, where the density is extremely important. We can't just grow and no one ever matches, right? And so from there, once you add, let's say, your 3 favorite places here in Flatiron, then you will see profiles of people who'd want to go specifically to one or more of those 3 places.
Yeah. How do you think about churn? Given that, some people might be importing like some, recommendations or places they like, you can imagine them wanting to take that with them as they go. And yet, if it's more and around a dating profile, they might, not want to necessarily want to continue to engage with something where if they're in a relationship as an example.
Yeah.
So is that something, how do you think about that problem?
Totally. Yeah. You hit it on the head. I mean, that's the future state of the product. So essentially the baseline, right? The wedge is let's start with dating and then let's graduate you on. Let's say you meet your perfect match. You graduate on to what we consider as your romantic home base, right? Say me and you start dating. We both love the 3 same places. Why would you go? We have all this data. We understand what we both like. Now let's strengthen your relationship.
Would you take it further? And I'd ask this more founder to founder and maybe investor to founder in the context of the vision of the company and say it's maps and locations and lists, whatever all these restaurant sort of apps are, at the end of that, even without relationships, or maybe the relationships are the core, but it doesn't have to be only romantic. Maybe it's community, maybe it's, because that to me is really, as soon as you said it's a wedge, I was like, dating as a wedge is not something I've ever heard a company try to do.
Yeah.
Okay, so if that's true, how do you get there over time? So are you more focused then on the quality of the features around saving restaurants and reviews and photos than I would have expected? Because in my head, when you describe this generally, I didn't think a lot about those features. Obviously, they're important because you want the visual of the food, and I'm going to select, from the map. But as soon as you said, hey, dating is the wedge to this larger map-based relationship experience, I go, oh, then reviews do become really important, and photos do become really important, and broad discovery becomes important.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm biased, but I think sort of the benefit of what we're building is we're laying the infrastructure to then go out and build all of these different things. Can we become the go-to social and romantic home base of the next generation, right? You think of the products of yesterday, they did a really good job at creating one-to-one communication, Discord, all of these ways of bringing people together. Now let's take it a step further and let's bring the real world back into that user experience online. And then everything gets very interesting. So going into let's say group dating, but also group social, and then one-to-one social, I want to go see this niche punk band in Ridgewood, right? Maybe I could meet a friend that would want to go as well, right? And that's where the layer of you're saying, sort of the venue, the activity is the start. And from there, we can branch off. To your point about the wedge, it is kind of counterintuitive, also a bit of a hook from an investor perspective. Dating is commodity. Dating apps are commodity. And so what we need to do is differentiate by creating a product, right? Starting with this, all right, I think I can get people realistically to get to know one another based on their interests. And then I can expand and we can become the product that we actually are or will be.
Yeah, I also think there's something that's different here, which I like, is that, whatever the stat is, 90% of people, produce 10% of the content.
Yeah.
And I think, there's a lot of apps like Belly that exist, and there's power users, and a lot of people are starting to, potentially use these things. But there's a large group of people that aren't motivated or incentivized to start to input their own preferences. But if they did, they would actually like the output.
Yeah.
And I think the nice thing here is that because someone's doing it for potentially a romantic partner, there's a hook for them as to why they would want to input their own preferences. And, they kind of come for the dating and they stay for the kind of continued learning about what might be worth doing or kind of what activities are fun or whatnot.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point because not only does it incentivize you to put those things in, but it also incentivizes you to actually reflect on, I don't know what I like. People, you're busy, you go through the city, then you start to realize, hold on, let me take a step back and think about what is my scene? What is my circle? And that alone, like that, we're giving people the opportunity to explore, their preferences, which I think is unique.
Yeah, and I've tried a lot of those apps over the course of time, and in terms of just the preferential type apps of like, do you want to like save where you like going to a restaurant or whatnot? And I can imagine if you catch someone in a state where they're also looking for a romantic partner, like there's no better motivation than wanting to actually be thoughtful about your preferences than if you're also trying to make sure that you're displaying, a certain, your best self, so to speak.
Yeah, there's signaling there for sure.
Totally.
Just to wrap things there for time, I've been thinking and reflecting on this. Like, it's super interesting, the whole incentive thing that you pointed out. I've never uploaded, for example, a photo to Yelp or Google reviews. I'm not that person. I don't even leave reviews.
Yeah.
And so, like, thinking through the fact that this incentive exists, and as that became a realization that this was a wedge and this could be where the product goes, what I've been reflecting on, and I don't think I have my answer, is like, should you be putting more of that into the pitch? I kind of like what you did. First of all, you're a good communicator. So kudos on that just in general throughout this conversation. And so you pitched the dating in the map thing without saying, by the way, there's all these weird things that this does.
Yeah.
That made it delightful.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking like, okay, I like that, but should you bring it up front so that it's clear to certain people who won't make those connections and aren't maybe imagining as much, like, because this is what makes it more interesting for me. Dating is hard. Dating with maps is interesting. Is it investable? But then all this other stuff, it's like a bet on psychology and again, incentive for user behavior. So part of me wants you to push it up to the front. What do you think about that, Leeor?
No, I think it's a great idea. I think continue to pitch this idea to people who've never heard of it. And particularly if there's an investor bent, I think that is helpful for a particular type of pitch. But because I think like that'll get you out of your own head as to like how other people who might not be friends with you or may have never heard of the app as to like how they take things in. And therefore you're kind of like exposing yourself to like, what are the connections that they're making and how do I kind of combine all those connections such that it kind of helps my pitch both to users and also to investors as well.
Yeah. That's helpful.
Thanks so much for sharing.
Yeah,
Love
of
it.
course. Thank you guys.
Yeah.
What's your name?
My name is Alan.
Alan, you're going to have a minute to pitch, and then you're going to get some feedback. Are you ready to tell us what you're building?
I am.
Alan, what are you building?
So, as I mentioned, my name's Alan. I've had about 20 years in AI, ex-Google and Microsoft. And AI is amazing, but if you've used it, you know that it has a lot of problems. It's unreliable, it hallucinates, it doesn't know anything about you, and it repeats its mistakes. So it's like talking to the worst customer service agent ever. And we can fix it, but we can only fix it manually. It's expensive, it's slow, it's repetitive. And so what RagMetrics does is it automates the fix loop. So AI fixes AI. Instead of having a human in the loop, you have automated AI judges that help you fix it, which means you can run 100 times more experiments and you find out about the problems before your customers do.
Under a minute.
Cool.
I've got a lot of questions I might start with. Do you want to start or should I?
Go for it, yeah.
I get it at a conceptual level as someone who both plays a lot with these tools but also understands the technical foundations behind them. But I don't know if I get it from a how you do it perspective. So give us a little bit more of that secret sauce.
100%. So if you want to fix anything about AI, this is the way almost everybody does it today. There's 3 spots that everybody does manually. The first is figuring out the metric. What does it mean to be fixed? The second is labeling some data. What's an example of a good answer if I get this kind of question? And over again. And the third, and this is the hardest part, is actually reading what the model says and deciding if it's good or bad. And this has to be done at massive scale if you're trying to build something that's worth paying for. And all of those things are being done manually today, but none of them have to be done manually. All of them can be automated. The metric selection, labeling the data, and most importantly, reading the answers and deciding, judging if they're good or bad.
And does that innovation come because you are building supervisor models? So when you say it can be automated, I get that, but that could be done 1,000 different ways, right?
That's right.
And especially in the context of when you communicate this to investors, most investors won't know a lot about how this tooling works. So get away with them not being as curious as I am probably. But when you say it, I get very curious about, because it sounds like you're then going to sell to model makers or to frontline implementers and application layers.
Let me give you an example of the way I built for.
Yeah.
We helped an AI for accounting startup raise a $3 million seed because we help them prove that they're better at accounting than all the free alternatives.
So let's use them as the example. Are you running a supervisor model on their local model, their proprietary model, their use of OpenAI's API, and how do you implement that?
Those are excellent guesses, but it's actually not any of those. It's
Okay.
simpler. It's simpler than that. So when we started up on the scene, they were building this application for 6 months, and their customer basically was asking them, hey, why should I pay you anything when I could just send my accounting questions for free to ChatGPT, to Bing, to Meta AI, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, because we're better at accounting. And the customer said, how do I know? And they said, here's an example where we're better at accounting. And the customer said, well, maybe that's cherry picked. And so what we put together is an accounting benchmark specific for them, for the specific accounting task that they're interested in. And we measured the accounting quality of the responses on that task from their system versus from all the alternatives that the customer was thinking about.
You're just doing benchmarking?
We helped them build that benchmark on our platform.
Understood. So you're not doing the actual you're not helping with the improvement of the model.
We created the feedback
benchmarks
loop
that enable them to
correct
the feedback loop.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, I will say, by the way, and I'm curious if the same thing happened to you. I thought you were helping them improve the model. That's why I asked, are you building a supervisor model because you're going to this feedback? Did you go through the same thing? Yeah. So very and you're a good storyteller generally. I've been tuning in. However, whatever sequence in that minute got me to think that you were doing like a supervision and a feedback loop inside either model training or post-model deployment. I couldn't get out of until we got to this.
Yes. Yeah.
So
the feedback loop is on the roadmap, but we have to start somewhere.
Right. I mean, I think even making that demonstrably clear, like starting with, like, is just helpful.
That's a
if
good
someone
point.
who's hearing the idea for the first time. Sometimes it's like you make the jump in your head because you know that's how things work. You've been around people who also understand that premise, and I think it's just helpful to more clearly like communicate that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, guys. One question you might ask is like, where did the accounting knowledge come from? So if they're the experts in accounting, how did we create a benchmark for them? And this was it's a challenge that a lot of AI builders face, especially if you don't have deep domain expertise in what it is that you're building, which this customer didn't. They were selling to accounting companies, but they themselves did not have that accounting expertise. And so it was a real challenge for them to come up with that labeled data, examples of an accounting question and the right, perfect, exact accounting answer.
What's the product?
The product is a co-pilot that helps you reach SOC 2 compliance.
What?
So SOC 2 is a regulation that...
No, I know what SOC 2 is.
Okay. If you want to reach SOC 2 compliance...
Oh, sorry, hold on. Your product. You're answering about the... For a second, I was like, wait, what did you say?
That's what
I meant to say.
Our
you
product.
Got benchmarks.
Right.
Yeah, thank goodness.
Sorry.
So you got benchmarks. I was really worried for a second. You got benchmarks. What is the product? Now that I know it's benchmarks, I want to know more. How does that come to be? Because to all of these examples, especially with the accounting thing of like there's expertise involved. I want to know, is it a digital product? Are they self-serve using it? Is it implementation with you? How do they retrieve the benchmarks? And then how usable do you make the benchmarks for them to use within their sales process or their reinforcement learning processes, et cetera?
These are excellent questions. I'll try to answer all dozen of them with a couple sentences.
I like to load them up.
That's good. Our product is a SaaS platform. The AI builders log into our platform to create benchmarks, use benchmarks, iterate, and improve. And
by the way, that should be part of the pitch. Like that, I like that a lot. Like I think that you should incorporate. That's like much clearer. Yeah, I like that a lot.
That's great.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
They iterate on it just like you would iterate on a piece of code, just like you would iterate on an image or a video as you're editing it. When they reach a result that they like, they're welcome to publish it. They have access to all the data, all the assets. Our platform is a technology that makes that iteration faster, much faster, 100x faster, because there's a lot fewer manual steps and a lot more automated steps.
Well, but give me the before and after. So, and it doesn't seem in great detail, but when you say they're creating the benchmark and iterating it, and you help them do it much faster, is that because you're creating synthetic data that allows the... Okay.
So the before is they've been building this thing for 6 months. They've been asking their customer to test it out. Their customer's been telling them, I'm too busy. Tell me when it's ready. That's the before. Zero label data.
I want to give you a different piece of feedback just because it's happening to me, and I want you to recognize it. You're very good at telling stories. which is generally a skill that a lot of people in the world don't have. They speak in details, and stories are more compelling for a variety of reasons. However, because you are overusing stories, you sometimes only 10% answer my questions. So you're about to go into an example where like your customer has customers and they can't service their customer because they're not meeting the benchmark. I get that. I more just want to know like the person who's using this product, not what they'd have to do to like meet their customer, what would they have to do to get to the good outcome for the model?
Super short answer. They gave us an accounting textbook. We scanned it automatically and we generated the synthetic data then they able to benchmark.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Are there any specific verticals that you're kind of finding are people are more excited about wanting to use your product?
Accounting, legal, tax, consulting, healthcare, anywhere where the bar is high and failure is super expensive, and therefore quality is really important.
Are you primarily selling to kind of net new startups that are kind of struggling to like gain credibility around their product because it just hasn't existed yet?
That's a really interesting question about all of our outbound is to startups. But we've had inbound from 5 or 6 public companies, including LinkedIn. So the companies that are building at the biggest scale experience this problem at the biggest scale. We don't have the resources to reach them proactively, but somehow they're finding us.
Yeah.
So
how do you think about, so it's an interesting wedge. How do you think about the fact that eventually people will have trust in their AI products just naturally? And so there is an element where like, it's not like there are like services that kind of say, hey, this SaaS product works or not, but those are not necessarily venture scale businesses. But I could imagine using benchmarking as a means to an end, might be something interesting as you're kind of embedded in that process. How do you think about the starting point versus the ending point?
100%. I was talking to one VC and he was telling me, well, why won't the big AI labs, they all need this, obviously. Why won't they just build this product and take you out of business like that? And the easiest way to explain why that is unlikely, I will never say never, but it's unlikely by analogy to capital markets. So bond issuers don't rate their own bonds because nobody would believe them.
But there's a marketplace dynamic there that makes that different. I am motivated to tell you my product works so that you buy my product. But the reason in financial markets it's even more so that they don't do it is because it's about future forecasting and prediction in a competitive market that has moving variables versus if I'm potentially buying from an accounting automation firm, I have a set of deterministic inputs where I want relatively deterministic outputs. Like I want what I put in as numbers to get me the accurate results versus those models, we all have incentives as to how we might perform in the future.
Sure.
So I do think that's slightly different.
It's also illegal in this country.
Right.
So, and if you're an investor and you have a choice of bonds, you generally want to take your advice from somebody who doesn't profit if you pick one bond versus all the others.
But you're letting them create the benchmark.
We're letting them create a benchmark that's very specific to their application.
But I guess my point is you're letting them create it.
That's true.
I mean, even when O3 came out, I don't know how much people paid attention to OpenAI's O3 that like beat a variety of physics and math and science benchmarks. The immediate reaction to a lot of this from very cynical part of tech Twitter was, did they train on some of the
100%
the benchmark data, and some of which is allowed, some of which isn't, and there's this whole conversation. But my point is, already people don't love that OpenAI could have been collaborating with the folks benchmarking AI models on the benchmarking of their latest AI model. So that feels to be exacerbated if application layer companies are benchmarking their applications.
I was thinking you were going the other way because OpenAI is clearly conflicted in reporting the results about O3. They want to sell you O3. They will only report the results that make O3 look amazing. What you really want is a third party that is not conflicted.
Is that what you are?
Yes, absolutely. That's not what we were. That is not what we were in the example that I gave you with...
Is it SaaS then?
No, it's an alternative. It's an alternative model.
No. What?
It's an alternative business model to what we were discussing.
What is? Your business? Your business is SaaS.
Our business is SaaS at the moment.
I guess you're contemplating kind of a rating agency-like business model for AI models.
Correct. I think first we have to get a couple of customers.
But you're going to be a rating agency.
We would like to grow into the rating agency, but I don't think that we can do that in the beginning.
Interesting. So you're using a SaaS that'll allow them to benchmark themselves to get to a point. Okay.
My concern with that, with the vast majority of applications, obviously at the tip tops, I think we'll continue to need perhaps benchmarking because like one mistake means millions of dollars. But I do wonder if this is a moment in time for the majority of various models where like if you like in 3 to 5 years, if you have a customer support model, like will you need to know the benchmarking, or will there just be social proof around it that people kind of realize that the app works and so therefore they're going to engage with it?
Sure.
I'm not sure.
Well, imagine you're a buyer. Let's say that you work for an enterprise, maybe Amazon, and you're shopping for a customer service agent, automated one. How will you pick? Like, you're not going to pick based on whether O3 did the best on some physics benchmark. That's irrelevant for you. What you really want to know is how well does each of these vendors do on your specific customer service questions. And ideally, you'd like to know that before you spend the money. So what you really want is a bake-off where you know the question.
Do you enable the bake-off?
We do. We enable the bake-off.
Have you said that so far? For the sake of time, we're gonna have to wrap, but I want to wrap this and hear your thoughts as well. First of all, so fascinating that I was ignoring the street sounds that Jake was telling me about. So you have a really interesting product here, and in a space that I think is super fascinating. So your challenge, however, then, especially when you're talking to people who kind of are competent in this space, is, as you were talking, I was thinking about the O3 challenge, AI model makers having the benchmarking challenge. Will people trust benchmarks that are self-created versus not? And your challenge, therefore, is because it's so interesting and net new, and then your product changed a few different times as to what exactly it did and who it did it for and what it might be in the future. I had too many interesting things to follow, which meant you actually did get what you want broadly, which is me leaning in and asking questions and being really engaged, but I never resolved any of the threads. I got interesting answers, and again, I'm compelled by it all. However, I kind of give candidates in job search that I coach this feedback. Sometimes you have a really great conversation with an interviewer, and you answer some questions and you're storytelling to each other. Then the person walks out, they go back to their desk and they're like, do I want to pass this person through? I don't understand them well enough. We didn't get to some of my questions. Some of those threads didn't get closed. And in the example of a hiring manager, they don't go, let me go call that person and flesh out what I didn't know. They go, I'm just going to move to the next candidate. And you have that challenge because it's interesting, yet not yet shaping for me. I can imagine investors having that same motion with you. So that's the challenge to figure out.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting components here. I'll send you something after this around the hero's journey and how to properly articulate interesting components such that you make sure that your listener understands maybe all the components as well as you do. And I think there's still some kind of missing items if you kind of reorient some of the pitch around some of the interesting points you made throughout our conversation and in kind of a tight fashion. I think you're more likely to have someone not only lean in, but also make sure that they're not asking themselves 3 questions every single time they're hearing a net new point. Because I think there's a lot of interesting points that you were making.
Thank you, guys.
Really good job.
Appreciate it. Thank you.